So the third part, and we feel this is the most important, is discerning facts from alternative facts. And so it's like, how can we, especially our children, better utilize critical thinking skills to find truth among a sea of misinformation? In my research for this, this study came up like 3 times. It's a fairly big study. It was over 8,000 participants out of Stanford University, 2016. This is scary numbers, guys. Students, middle to college. So we're talking about young adults as well, not just little kids. They didn't bother with elementary because they believe in Santa and Tooth Fairy and stuff, so it doesn't count. So from like middle school, which is where I start, all the way through college, are duped by fake news more than your older adults, I guess you can say. So 80% could not discern ads made to look like news stories versus the real deal, while 40% believe the headline of a picture of deformed flowers, this is the actual picture that was used in the study, was solid evidence of the toxicity near Fukushima. And this is what's really happening, is that you're getting half-truths. So this photograph was in Japan. They are deformed flowers. It's not Photoshop, but has nothing to do with radioactivity, has nothing to do with Fukushima. And so I think that's what we're getting bombarded, especially our children. It's just this like, there's some truth, but it's this melodramatic soap opera, I don't know, spell was cast upon it. And it just turns into this whole thing itself. And anyone who wants to geek out, I have that small link in the bottom if you want to take a picture of, I think it's a full summary of the study or something like that, like the abstract of the study.
Especially those of you who are teachers, it's a pretty
There's only
good
like 2
one.
of them.
You can perform it with your own students, and it has exemplars as well, exemplar responses.
Yeah, yeah. So now that we understand how our children are being, including college kids, are being duped more than most of us, part of it is where to look. The simple thing we can do, like, okay, there's certain places we can trust to fact check. One of them, some of you heard of Snopes.com is a big one. Factcheck.org is used more in the education world. Newsela also is big in the education world. And then Google Scholar, I notice a lot of people don't know about, and he always makes fun of me because I put it in my videos like all the time.
Every single video.
Because I'm like, if you want to look up anything in academia, I mean anything, not just science, it's in through Google Scholar, because only published peer-reviewed studies are there. If it's not, like, you're not going to find anything bad about GMOs in a published journal. It doesn't exist. It's all hoopla made up. It's just fear of the unknown. Now, is it possible? Sure, it could be, but the studies are not there. The data is not there. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, what if someone hijacks Google or Snopes? And that's a possibility. As of now, these are solid standards, but that's a fear I have. What if the wrong government gets the wrong amount of power, the wrong things just snowball, and someone owns Google, let's say? These may not be reliable anymore. I don't know, but as of now, this is like a good place to go. Even law, like anything in academia, it doesn't have to be science. Google Scholar is fantastic. That's why I keep showing it for the videos, even though my kids are not using it. But older kids and us adults can check it out.
Do your kids use Google Scholar?
We encourage them to, but they don't know about it either. Unless we tell them.
It's basically a super filter. It's not just like, oh my God, if you type anything in Google, oh my God, you know what you'll get. But if you put it through the filter of Google Scholar, it's only going to be peer-reviewed studies. And it's like, oh my God, when I discovered it from a professor, I was like, oh my God. So that's great of like what to do. But, and I put, sorry, it's not a picture, this is a little video. So here's an example of me talking about Google Scholar. It's only like 30 seconds.
Facts are facts. There are no alternatives. Remember, Jimbo, it's all about sources. 1, be skeptical. Just because somebody says it doesn't make it true. 2, who's saying it? Make sure what you're reading or watching is from a reputable source. 3, verify. Independent verification can confirm whether something is factual. Make sure it was originally published in a professional journal. You can verify this with Google Scholar. Certain facts can also be verified on Snopes.com. You getting all this, Jimbo?
And he's sleeping. So that's great of like you point them in the right direction, but we know that's not enough, especially as educators. So it's better to teach them how than to teach them what to look up. So I kind of touched upon that with saying like, the first 2 steps, and I kind of kept it short. You can expand on that. And again, I don't want to read again from a slide, but this is a good one. This is straight from the nextgenscience.org. It was called, this is for the new standards. Actually, once you start, because you started Those who don't know, it depends on what state you live in. You can kind of see the map there. The blue states have adopted what's called the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS, and it's totally flipped in a good way. It's not just, here's a bunch of facts. The sun is 93 million miles away, remember that. And we're moving to a place where it's not about being a walking encyclopedia or Wikipedia. It's about what do you do with that information? How do you think critically? How do you problem solve? And NGSS is going in that direction. So I'm starting full-fledged this coming school year. I did it half so last year. You started?
Yeah, we've been implementing it for a while, for a few years, about 3-4 years. So like you said, it's a focus on depth versus breadth. How many of you are native to California? Most of you. So you might remember the old CST tests where you just, bubbled in multiple choice answers. And so not only have the standards changed, but also the assessment that students are expected to take is very high leverage. So it involves critical thinking, data analysis, being able to write an argument. So all of these skills, it's more of a focus on skills coupled with the content. To help students be more successful in being able to discern between what's good and what's bad.
And so in this quote here, what they pull, it's like, even if you're like, I'm here for propaganda, I don't care about science or education, it's beyond that. And so excuse me, I'll try to be dramatic in reading it. Scientific education is central to the lives of all Americans, all people really, but this is for, standards for America.
Propaganda for America.
It is, it really is, but it's a great one to have. The standards are written for all students, all standards, all students is like the main push for NGSS.
Never before has our world been so complex, and scientific literacy is critical to making sense of it all. Science is also at the heart of innovating, leading, and creating jobs for the future. That's why all students, regardless of whether they pursue college or STEM careers, should have access to high-quality K-12 science education. And it's basically just being better informed citizens. If you're voting, you need to know what real academia is doing, not what politicians are saying. I want to get my science from a scientist, not from a politician. It's just...
And if you look at the history of the standards, there tends to be like a pendulum swing in the way science is taught. So like we brought up the moon landing. During that time, there was a big focus in school curriculum to be about inquiry and students discovering. And then the 80s came along, and then, politicians flipped, and then there was this focus on memorization and facts. And then now we're at this upswing, especially with this technological revolution we're having, where we're getting students to think critically again.
Yeah, so there's some good news with that. And also just science and engineering practices, it forces students to ask questions, analyze and interpret data, engage in a thoughtful argument, not just name calling and trolling online, and then, obtaining, evaluating, communicating information. And that's where the standards are going. So that's a good thing. Not all states are on board.
This guy practices what he preaches. He has a couple of trolls on his YouTube channel, and instead of saying, you suck too, he'll go in there and he'll basically break down and show facts and like, this is why I believe this is why I put this in the video, this and that. And what did they do?
They disappear. Every time they disappear. One guy kept going back and forth. But as long as they're respectful and not using bad words, I'll leave it up there. Because I model it for my kids. I'm like, guys, you're going to be trolled. Don't be like, F you, and just write back. Like, you lose. As soon as you call them a name, you lose. So just present what they're saying. And so if they're respectful enough, then I'll give it back to them. And 99% of them, they disappear. It's like, and I show the kids, and I'm like, well, where did he go? I don't know, it's interesting. So this is something, if you're an educator or a parent, I advise taking a picture of this, and then you can Google and find it yourself. These are two great sources of the quick infographics. Obviously, you can read volumes on this stuff. But the great late Carl Sagan, rest in peace, he didn't call it, like, fake news wasn't really a term back then in the 70s. So he just had it where, like, 9 questions to know that if you're dealing with nonsense or not. I think he used the word nonsense. And so Curiosity.com and ASAP Science, they kind of reworded his stuff a little bit and turned into these, like, 9 tricks, let's call it, to avoid fake news. I'm not going to go through all of them, but one to point up, the little pink one with the light bulb, don't get attached to your own hypothesis. All of us have our own biases. We have our own outlook on life. And perception is everything. We don't have all the answers, none of us here. So it's like if you're looking for something, you're like, what's your own little propaganda going in your mind? What are we thinking when we look for it? And I had to let go of that. As I got more and more this education in science, I was that person. Oh, it's like this because it's the first way I learned it. And then it's liberating. It's so liberating once you just let go. Like the evidence is there. Like I used to avoid Diet Coke like the plague because aspartame and saccharin is so bad. And then I was presented with research. It's like 100 times the dosage to a lab rat. Of course the lab rat's gonna get a tumor. What do you expect? But if you have a Diet Coke once in a while, you're fine. So like, I changed my personal behaviors based on the best research that's out there, and I find it liberating. Debate no evidence, I mean, I can go on, but you get an idea. The one on the right, and this is awesome because we're in the library, is from the International Federation of Library Associations. I can't remember this, so I have to like read it. They put this out a little bit ago, and it's similar, how to spot fake news, consider the source, check the author. I mean, great stuff. So if you need a quick infographic for a student, a child, or someone is trolling you online, you can just like, hey, did you go through all these things? And it's really for ourselves too. Like I have to stop and catch myself sometimes if I'm getting emotional. Like we gotta be like Spock, man. It's like we gotta be like Spock with this stuff, because then we lose once we get like a Captain Kirk. It's like, we lose. Once we get Kirk on it, we lose. And so it's like, another one while your cameras are out, because we're almost wrapping up and we'll end it with some Q&A. But here's some other great sources that myself and Lupe found. The first two they're like those little bit.lys, there's little short links. So that's a shorter version of a full-blown lesson plan from PBS NewsHour and from KQED on, it's designed for teachers, I guess as a parent you could use it too. Like, I have a lesson for you, son, But it's a lesson plan, like a full-blown lesson plan. I've yet to use it myself, but I'm definitely going to use it this coming year that I go full in. And with your high school kids, it'd be great. And we can like swap stories, like how did it work for you, da-da-da. But it's specifically, and it's just practice. It's not just like, kids, this is the tricks you do and you'll be fine. They'll show pictures, they'll show stuff, and like, what do you think, real or not? They'll show, and like, there's an actual practice to it. How awesome is that? So like, none of us want to be fooled. And these are longer links, so it helps to take a picture, but there's 3 more sources. Actually, Luby, you pulled them. Are they articles? They're not lesson
So
plans.
the Google has a whole series on applied digital skills, and so they start with testing credibility and knowing how to fact check, because it's easy for us to say, well, check the source or who is it coming from, but as our students, they don't know that. Like we can discern that information a little bit more. So these have videos and exercises for students to be able to figure that out. But I just wanted to go back to the earlier Fukushima picture. I actually showed that to my students, and I was very excited that one of my students, who is a student with special needs, was able to ask a question and say, well, wouldn't that just be due to a mutation? And mutations are random, and they're not necessarily harmful. And so that was a very proud moment of mine, because again, the standards are written for all students, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. But also it showed me that this is working, if they're able to, when presented with this, they're thinking a little bit more about it. Some of them were able to identify it wasn't in this picture, but if you go to the story, there's a really long link of the source. And the students were able to identify, like, it was very long, it was kind of nonsensical the way that it was written. Some of them were able to say, well, it doesn't say .org or .edu, so you can't trust it as much. And that's a great tool that they know, but I also said, well, how do you know what the org is? Because any org can push that out. So just saying .org doesn't necessarily mean that you should trust it. So these, especially the Google Applied Digital Skills is one of my favorite ones, because it even has the students write a fake news article just so that they can go through the process of.
Can you write a fake news?
Yes, they can write a fake news. So, and see, like, and then they test each other. Well, how do you know that this is fake?
Wow, cool. I mean, that's where we're going. Anything else in the News ELA or the Common Sense Media?
Common Sense Media is just a great tool. There's it's a family tool and an educator tool as well. So they also, not only do they do articles on this, but they kind of fact check through different types of sources. News ELA is a site. A lot of teachers have students do current event reports, and so this one helps to write it in sort of like a user-friendly language or student-friendly language, but they themselves go through a very review process, and they also have links to how you can review and the sources yourself.